On the 26th and 27th of November 2010, a two-day summit meeting was organized by the European Heart Rhythm Association and the Hungarian Society of Cardiology in Budapest. The conference was entitled Implantable Cardioverter Defibrillator for Life Initiative, Fighting Against Sudden Cardiac Death in Emerging Economies.
So, distinguished guests, dear Professor Fathers, ladies and gentlemen.
The aim of the summit was to demonstrate the benefit and efficacy of the prevention of sudden cardiac death, as at an annual level, SCD is responsible for a significant part of the diseases, and it is the leading cause of death in industrial countries. An invitation had been sent to the presidents of all cardiologist societies and arrhythmia working groups in the member states of ESC, and also to all the decision makers of EHRA. Representatives from countries with low, medium, and high procedure numbers were equally invited to highlight the regional differences and reflect on their political and economical background. Finally, 197 registered participants from 31 countries arrived. The faculty was composed of 55 renowned cardiologists, arrhythmologists, health economical and political experts, who represented 27 countries and acted as invited chairs and speakers in the different sessions. The meeting was chaired by Professor Béla Merkeli, President of the Hungarian Society of Cardiology. As Professor Merkeli says, the meeting aims to build bridges between the medical, political, and industrial sectors. The acceptance and the efficacy of implantable devices in the treatment of heart failure and heart rhythm disturbances, especially that of ICD, has increased enormously in recent years, and therefore we apply them in a wide range. In spite of this, many patients with high risk of SCD cannot receive these antiarrhythmic treatments, partly because of the low availability of the devices and partly because of the lack of properly qualified specialists. Implantation does not simply depend on budget, financing, and GDP, but it also requires deep professional knowledge. As the conference emphasized, both the theoretical background of device therapy, such as professional recommendations, choice of implantable devices, programming and problem solution, and the practical education of implantation methods are important for the increase of implantation numbers. The paradox of the effort to reduce SCD is that besides the risk stratification and the supply of primary illnesses, the implantation numbers of the applied devices in primary and secondary prevention, primarily that of ICDs, have not reached the case numbers of CSD yet in the economies in transition.
In an interactive roundtable.
Sudden cardiac death remains the first cause of death in the industrialized countries.
The event was opened by Professor Panos Fardas, the president of EHRA and the president-elect of ESC, who disclosed that the summit meeting was not about the technical details of electrophysiology, but more about its everyday benefits in the prevention of sudden cardiac death.
And nowadays, we have the solutions.
The White Book, in the very beginning, if you want to change a problem, if you want to approach, let's say, politicians, healthcare, economics, or insurance providers, you have to show that how big the problem is.
Cardiologist Dr. Christian Volper, along with Dr. Aurikio and Vardas, has researched the current status of cardiac electrophysiology in member countries of the ESC and published it in the EHRA White Book.
And I think it's about time to think about generating guidelines for a minimum of standard of care.
On the second day of the meeting, Professor Frans van der Werf explained the process of establishment and the implementation of international guidelines, mentioning the difficulties of the implementation as well. In his opinion, international guidelines for a minimum standard of care should be initiated and supported by the international and national cardiac societies.
And this is the trend for the cost of ICD therapy over the last few years. You can see it's now down at $12 a day, and that's because the devices have become cheaper.
Professor John Kemp talked about the costs of ICD treatment, which proved to be the most cost-effective method of prevention and treatment of SCD, and explained how the expenditure of the treatment influences the number of patients actually receiving it. At the end of the sections, in the frame of 30 minutes long roundtable discussions, the participants had the possibility to introduce the practice and the data of their own countries and to reflect on the political-economical background of these in a few minutes. Following this, the participants discussed the opening possibilities and pointed out the lack of homogeneity. All the invited speakers agreed that it is a problem to be solved in any case. All the roundtable discussions were followed by the presentation of a vision of the future and the policy of the given treatment, previously discussed in the section. Last but not least, the story, the importance, the goal, and the planned future of the Eastern Initiative was summarized by Professor Goran Milasanovic.
Communication with the referrals, small meetings, national meetings, educational guidelines, statistics, database.
In its entirety, EHRA Summit reached its goal. Beside the professional talks, there had been place for the presentation of the political and economical effects as well, and the conclusion was also favorably received by the national and international media. Hungary had been chosen by the European Society of Cardiology as the site of the latest EHRA Summit for the reason that Hungary belongs to those countries where the number of the implanted cardiac rhythm management devices equals the healthcare demands. Hungary is part of the green region, which means that the number of the implanted devices grows at an adequate rate and the development can be maintained. By receiving the opportunity of organizing the summit, the Hungarian Society of Cardiology could introduce its decennial work exemplary in the region.